Hi everyone, it's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the organizers, all the staff for these two days workshops. I will tell you a little bit of my PhD project about public policies around soil quality protection in Switzerland. The general question of my research relates to the ineffectiveness and inefficiency of the legislation and implementation instruments to mitigate arable soil erosion and soil degradation in general. But today I will just focus on the presentation on two aspects. How soil erosion became a public problem in Switzerland. So in other words, what is the carrier of this problem, the carrier? And the second question is how public policies around soil quality protection were configured over decades. But let's start from the beginning. Switzerland is quite well renowned for its semi-direct democracy, its own concordant systems, which foster the consensus building during the political administrative decision-making process. But it's also quite renowned for the principle of having part-time politicians. So in this system, the Confederation is responsible for enacting the laws, and the different cantons are responsible to enforce them. And it's partly thanks to these political characteristics that Switzerland were able to, from the 70s, to develop a comprehensive regulatory framework around soil protection. It has been divided into the quantitative soil protection, which relates to the issue of soil destruction, soil seeding, and this issue is based on the Special Planning Act of 1979. It's not so sharp, I'm sorry. It's better on the laptop. And it's also divided into the qualitative soil protection, both in the Agricultural Act and in the Environmental Act. And the idea of qualitative soil protection is to protect the long-term soil fertility in the case of the Environmental Protection Act. In the case of the Agricultural Act, the idea is to protect soil resource in the long term. So it's quite a different definition, very important in the end. I will tell you why. But despite this regulatory framework and decades of implementation of the different tools and instruments in the field, and all these instruments and tools were resulted from consensus building, soil experts agree that arable soils continue to degrade and that soil erosion still constitutes a major environmental problem in Switzerland. So how can we explain this? There are many reasons, and I will just focus on one aspect today. Most public officers and scientists, they point out the lack of implementation, and this is quite true. There is a lack of, there is many resistance among the farmers community, but there is also resistance in the cantonal administration who have to enforce the different ordinances, the different laws. And this happens because there is a few political pressure and support to enforce the laws. But very few of these different stakeholders, and especially the public officers, put into question the legislation in itself, while it contains big inconsistencies. And, I will explain why there are these inconsistencies. First, I will focus on the career of soil erosion. Soil degradation and erosion never become a social problem in Switzerland, despite we have like public policies. And agricultural soil are subject to very conflicted interests and goals. In its political administrative history, soil quality has always entered by the back door. This is quite very interesting when we study the history of soil protection. And during the 60s, many engineers from the Polytechnical School of Switzerland used to carry out research in the developing world, and they observed in sub-Saharan countries disastrous ecological and social impact caused by soil erosion. And when they came back in Switzerland, they observed similar but less intense phenomena on agricultural fields and in vineyards, and some studies then started in Switzerland. A few years later, the Swiss Soil Science Society was established in response to the increase of soil issue in Switzerland, and included actors from the scientific research, public administration, and from private engineering offices. Slowly they set up a lobbying work for decades and developed strategies to get political alliances. And somehow they succeeded in putting this issue at the political agenda and to get the parliamentary approval. So soil degradation from social facts like the visible soil erosion on plots or the damage, off-site damage, became an expert problem, and straightforward it became a political and a public problem. But there has been there has been no other social mobilization around soil issue in Switzerland, and the public and political debates around those problems remain very, very weak. In order to illustrate this, I will shortly tell you a very symptomatic event. It takes place in the evening 6th of October 1983 in a famous hotel in Bern, the Swiss capital, a couple of hours before the final consultation of the first environmental law. The last 10 years of negotiations around the bill resulted in the removing every aspect of quality and articles, any aspect and articles about soil quality protection. And the agricultural community in particular were firmly opposed to any interference of the states around these issues. But this evening, nonetheless, in this hotel, some officials and right-sided politics decided to reintroduce secretly the 3 articles about qualitative soil protection in the bill. And the following day, in the parliament, the opponents were so concerned by other environmental issues like water pollution and air pollution that they didn't notice this change, and finally the bill were approved. And that's how we get our qualitative soil protection. And there are many, many other examples like this around soil quality protection in Switzerland. So this lack of citizen mobilization and public debates around those problems resulted in a very weak support and pressure by the politics during the configuration of public policies and during their implementation. And so it led to very, very harsh negotiations between the agricultural and the environmental communities, which still have conflicted interests and goals. And these discussions between those two communities, mainly around the legal basis and their implementation instruments, took place during decades in working groups, which are basically semi-public arenas. These groups included like politics, scientists, administrative experts, and private actors. But the way these groups were constituted or formed remains very unclear, and the civil society were systematically absent of these debates. And yet they decided how soil degradation and soil erosion would be defined as a public problem, which issues matter most, who to blame, and finally what to claim. So in the end, soil erosion was problematized or framed in the case of the ordinance, it's the ordinance on direct payments. It's related to the cross-compliance system in Switzerland. I showed this ordinance because this is the ordinance which has the main legal force in Switzerland. it has been described as a technical on-site and long-term problem. That means, when I say on-site, that means the impact on the long-term soil quality or the capacity of soil to produce food also. And soil erosion can degrade the soil resource. So people responsible are farmers, and in order to mitigate the problem, they can get subsidies from the state, and if they apply soil protection measures. So in such a system, farmers are both responsible and recipients of the public policies. According to Swiss soil experts, the legislation and implementation instruments are considered as an incredible success given the political and economic context then. But they also acknowledge that they are satisfactory solutions rather than optimal ones. And I will quickly review these inconsistencies. The first one is that soil experts didn't succeed in defining water erosion as a localized problem, and therefore to target soil protection measures and the subsidies then. And this is a crucial point because all the job of the scientists during the last 20 years were to say, okay, they are localized, soil erosion is localized, we have to target measures, we have to show you where soil erosion occurs and why, etc. But the agricultural community didn't want that at all because they wanted to be able to spread the payments to a maximum of farmers, and they didn't want to stigmatize some group of actors. Yeah. Stigmatize some group of actors, especially farmers who grow potato and maize. Mm-hmm. The other aspect is there is a big gap between how the legislation defines water erosion and how farmers perceive the problem. For the legislation, this is an on-site, long-term on-site problem, but for farmers it's mostly an off-site, a short-term, medium-term, off-site damage. If you have muddy floods in the church downstream, there will be a complaint, and then they would say, oh, maybe I'm going to change my practices. But if there is just an on-site problem, they can see a change on soil productivity. So this is important as well. There are big regulatory gaps like land improvements, territorial development, and last but not least, the decline of organic matter is not in the legislation and instruments at all because of political and economic reasons. In some agro-environmental policies around soil degradation and erosion are not resilient. In more sociological terms, that means that the translation of the problem results in a fragile mobilization of the different actors. So I'm going to conclude. In conclusion, so we can answer to those who claim that more legislation around soil issues are needed. We can answer yes and no, but definitely there is a lack of participatory democracy around environmental problems in general and soil degradation especially. And the constitution of maybe hybrid forums could be a response to this challenge. That means, in other words, that the instruments of implementation should be considered as the problem to be anticipated and solved rather than not as the solution in and of themselves. Moreover, it has to be put into question why people are not so concerned with soil degradation compared to water or air pollution, for example. So these issues has to be really appropriated by the civil society, and maybe the worldwide emergence of urban gardening and soil pollution in urban soils will play this role. Who knows? I will conclude on two open questions to the audience. Must we maintain the concept of limited liability company or corporation? That means socializing costs of agro-environmental impacts and privatizing profits of food production. This is, I think, a crucial question we have to answer. And as a social scientist and soil scientist as well, but how social science knowledge is taken into account during the decision and policy-making process. This is also an important question. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions? We'll see.
So what strikes me is how important and what a leading role Swiss-based organizations have in international development, where soil degradation is probably has a high conscious, worldwide has a greater level of awareness. And to me, it's very interesting that at the national level versus what some of the international development organizations that are based in Switzerland, there's really a big difference. And whether that's just my perception or whether there's really a disconnect or whether there's a possibility to draw on that kind of international awareness which is there to inform civil society in Switzerland. I don't know if there's...
Could you maybe just shortly the question?
Can the approach of the international development agencies and organizations which are strong in Switzerland help to inform Swiss civil society on these issues?
The international agencies are quite disconnected from the citizens of Switzerland. It's in Geneva or Zurich, but there are a few direct connections between the Swiss Confederation and the FAO or the WTO, for example. I don't think I can see any direct influence of these agencies on this raising of awareness among the population. I think it should more come from the from the ground. I mean, from the local places, because maybe I also studied a little bit the strategies and goals and message of the international agencies, and we can put into question a lot of their message. I mean, about maybe we can talk about this later, but I don't know if I answered the... Yes?
You mentioned the cantons and the importance of the cantons. One of the most efficient projects where the public took ownership of the soil, I saw in Lower Austria, which has a similar delegated, Austria has a similar delegated governmental structure. And in Lower Austria, I think the leader was elected and he had a strong interest in soils. And I was amazed how, through his leadership, the membership took ownership of their soil. For example, he had a little project so that every small village had a soil pit dug in their village, and they produced postcards of this is the soil of whatever village it was, and these were available, and the idea was that members of the local authority, local council would send out these cards to illustrate their soil. I went round in Austria and I was amazed at how every place I stopped, they felt that they owned the soil and therefore they wanted to protect it, and they took actions to protect it. I didn't wonder if you'd had the similar devolution, because you have a power at the canton level, same success in Switzerland.
Not really. In Switzerland, qualitative soil protection is not a big issue for people. It's more about quantitative soil protection, because there is the best soils are on the Swiss plateau, and the Swiss plateau there are a lot of pressure, about urbanization, infrastructures, etc. So it's mainly a question of we are destroying our agricultural soil, and the reflection just stopped just there. It's about destroying or not, but not about the level, the rate of degradation. Lots of
They produced a great film in Germany. I haven't a copy, but it's brilliant.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. So I think I caught what you said. Your proposal kind of at the end was hybrid forms. Is that the term you used? So I was wondering if there were any examples of that at all that had occurred, or was this something? Where? What are you imagining? How do you imagine such a form, or if you've seen something like that?
In the case of soil protection, it doesn't exist at all. In the environment, other environment issues in Switzerland either. It's more about, in Switzerland I know more about health issues and so on. I know that there are already something like that, but I don't know really much about this. And it's still my future, my future plan to do more
implement
research